So far, we learned about creating and managing a virtual machine using the graphical user interface. But at times, you may have to manage and do the same activities using PowerShell if you have to do things repeatedly. It's always important to have a knowledge of PowerShell, so let's also see how you can do the exact set of activities using PowerShell. In this demonstration, we'll create a virtual machine with Windows 2016 Data Center Edition using PowerShell. So I've got the PowerShell open, and first thing that I will do is connect to my Azure account. For that, I need to type in my user ID and password and get myself authenticated to Azure. Okay, now that we are authenticated, now there are several entities for a virtual machine: an operating system, an image, hard disk, network card, ports. All of these are entities for a virtual machine, and you have to write a commandlet for every entity. So first thing first, we have to start with credentials, because when a virtual machine is created, it will need an administrator, user ID and password. It will need a disk, image, etc. So we'll start with the credentials. So let's store the credentials of the virtual machine inside a variable called $cred and use get-credentials to call it. So when I hit enter, it will prompt me to type in my credentials. So I'll type like that. Alright, so those credentials that I just punched in is stored inside this variable called $cred. A virtual machine has certain sizes and specifications, like the CPU and the memory is what I'm referring to. So let's go ahead and use a variable called as $VM to put that information, specifically the VM sizes. This is done with a commandlet called azvmconfig. The name of the virtual machine will be my VM, and the VM size is standard_D1. When I hit enter, these variables are stored inside a variable called $VM. Now, if I call $VM, what am I going to get? It tells me that it is a hardware profile and the VM size is specified inside $VM. The next thing that you will need for the virtual machine is an operating system, which I can pull up using the following command. So what you have is an operating system which you're setting with the commandlet set-azvm operating system, storing these values inside an attribute called $VM, and you need a Windows machine. The name of the virtual machine is my VM. The credentials that are used are already specified in $cred variable here, and then you would like to have the provisioning VM agent automatically updated every time Microsoft updates in the backend. So let's hit enter and store all of that data inside $VM. Now if I call $VM this time, what do I have? Well, I have hardware profile and the OS profile as well, including the variables like these. So $VM is a variable that has a lot of information now. For example, name, hardware profile, and the operating system profile as well. So we are building the profile slowly for this virtual machine. And once we are done building the profile, we will call the virtual machine attribute to create a virtual machine with these profile attributes. What do we need next? An operating system is picked up from an image. So we need to tell the virtual machine where it needs to pick up the image from. So this is where we are telling that the source image will be a Windows server. It will be a 2016 data center and pick up the latest image from the Microsoft repository. So if I hit enter, these values are further stored inside the attribute called $VM. Now if I call $VM, we would have additional profile for this. So we got three attributes: the name, hardware profile, OS profile, plus the storage profile now, which is referring to an image. What do we need next? We also need to specify the hard disk size. Is it an SSD or it is picked up from an image? Do you need a read-write image or just write-only disk? Well, these are certain attributes that are specified with the commandlet called set-azvmosdisk. storing them in a variable called $VM. The size of the disk is 128. Let's hit enter and store it again in $VM. Now if I call $VM, I have image reference and the OS disk at this time. Earlier we had just the image reference. Now what's left is the network card. We need a network card attribute as well. I have already created a network card in my Azure portal. So if I go here, my VNet, under that there is a virtual network. And this virtual network has certain properties. And one of the properties is the resource ID. This network card is not attached to any device. I would like to attach this to the new virtual machine. I would need this resource ID, so I'll copy this attribute, go back to my PowerShell, and start using that particular attribute. So at this point in $VM attribute, I have just the name, hardware profile, OS profile, and storage profile. I want to add the network profile as well. The network profile is added with the following command, which is add-azure VM network interface connecting to the same VM, and the ID will be what we just copied from the Azure portal. This section, the resource ID, is nothing but the ID. So I'll go back to this and hit enter. Now if I go back to $VM, I have the network profile as well. Apart from hardware profile, OS profile, storage, now you got the network profile as well. So what do we do next? We have to now call this $VM attribute to create a virtual machine for us. So the command will be new-azure VM, new-azure VM or AZVM, and I want to create it in a resource group called prod_IT. The location will be in East US, and finally the VM will be $VM. So all the properties of the $VM would be called, which are all specified right ahead of time. So we'll be calling $VM using the commandlet called new-azure VM. Let's hit enter. Okay, we got a warning, that's fine. Let's just wait for a minute to get the VM provisioned. Looks like the VM is ready. We didn't get any messages or any error messages, so no news is good news. Let's go back to the portal and see if the VM is actually created. So here's the portal, refresh it, and let's see, looks like our VM, my VM, is ready. There's also a public IP associated with that. But let's try to get that information from the PowerShell. So I'll launch PowerShell again and use the command called get-azvm to get the VM statistics. The VM that we have in hand is my VM. So what are the attributes that you can pull for Azure Virtual Machine? Now if I say get-azvm and then pipe to get member, it will tell me all the properties that I can pull for the virtual machine. For example, certain properties are network profile, OS profile, the name of the virtual machine, location, etc. These are not the actual properties of the virtual machine, but the properties that this commandlet can pull for you. For example, if you're looking for tags, I can just say get-azvm and store this in a variable called as my VM, right? Oops. Okay, and then hit enter. That means my VM has all of these attributes. Then I can say $VM, $myVM dot, and then toggle to each of the properties that you see on the top here, right? So one of the properties is name, like location is also an attribute. Location is used East US. You can say $VM.name is my VM. So similarly, you can toggle to other attributes depending on what you're looking for. You may want to pick and choose a particular attribute. Let's say I want to see the network profile. That is a network profile. That is my network card, right? So let's say you want to get the IP address of this virtual machine using PowerShell. How would you do that? So the commandlet will then be get-az public IP address, and you want to get it for a particular virtual machine or network interface name. What is the network interface for this? It's my NIC, my VM nick, right? Let's hit enter. So the parameter set cannot be resolved using the specified name parameters. So I'll try again with hyphen resource group name, and my resource group is prod underscore IT, and hit enter. Let's see what we get. All right, so we have a public IP address right here. Looks like there is a network card with the name my public IP, and its IP address is 104.41.145.114. Now if you'd like to connect to it, you'll just see mstsc/v : and then the IP address, which is this. Now if you have 3389 port open, it will just RDP and connect directly. There you go. So it asks for the user ID, password, and then you connect to it. So in this video, we learned how you can create a virtual machine using PowerShell, how you can pass the attributes to the PowerShell in the variables called $VM in this case. And then finally, we also learned how you can get the attributes or properties of the virtual machine using PowerShell.